Alright guys, this week we are going to be talking about how organisms are organized. We're going to talk about the cell theory, and we're going to get into sexual and asexual reproduction. So we're going to start first with the organization of multicellular organisms in Objective 41. So first thing we're going to start with is cells. In organisms, everything is made up of cells, but in multicellular organisms, because they are made up of more than one cell, some of the cells are specialized, okay? Specialized cells are cells that perform specific functions in multicellular organisms. For example, your muscle cells perform different functions from your skin cells, which perform different functions from your brain cells and your eye cells. All of them are going to have different functions and jobs. And cells are the smallest unit of living things. All living things are made of one or more cells. In this case, we're talking about multicellular organisms. Okay? So, cells, when you have a bunch of specialized cells all working together, they make up a tissue. And tissues, again, a group of specialized cells working together. So you have muscle tissue, nervous tissue, connective tissue, epithelial tissue, which is skin tissue. All of these different types of cells working together form a tissue. And then when your tissues start working together, and you have all these different types of tissues working together, they create an organ. So a group of similar tissues that perform a similar, specific, and often complex function are called organs. And here are some examples of organs: your heart, liver, kidneys, brain, stomach, skin, your eyeballs. There's all different kinds of organs. And then you have a bunch of organs that work together to carry out a task, and you have an organ system. A group of organs that work together to perform a major function makes a system. So some of the ones that you're familiar with: nervous, circulatory, respiratory, digestive, excretory, immune, muscular, skeletal, endocrine, reproductive system. This year we are going to study these four: circulatory, respiratory, digestive, excretory, in addition to the human reproductive system in males and females. Okay, that is what we're doing. If you have a bunch of organ systems working together, they make up an organism. You have to have the organ systems working together. You can't have one organ system not work. If our respiratory system stopped working, then we wouldn't be able to exchange air. Our body would lack oxygen, and our body would stop working. If our circulatory system, which includes our heart and our blood and our arteries and veins, if that stopped working, then we would stop working. So all of your organ systems work together to create a multicellular organism. And here it is all together, and this is what you have to know. Cells make up tissues, tissues make up organs, organs make up organ systems, and organ systems make up an organism. Okay, you need to know those, and you need to know them in order. Okay, moving on, we're going to talk about cell theory and reproduction. First, we're going to talk about some scientists who were important to understanding the cell theory. The first guy is Robert Hooke. He is the first guy who discovered cells, and he discovered them by looking at a slice of cork under the microscope. He thought that they looked like tiny boxes or some honeycombs, but he thought that they only existed in plants and fungus, and that was in 1665. In 1673, Anton von Leeuwenhoek observed pond scum under a handheld microscope, and he discovered single-celled organisms. You guys saw those with our protist unit when we were talking about protists. And so that's what he saw. He called them animalcules, like tiny animals. And then he started looking at blood from some different animals like fish, birds, frogs, dogs, humans, and he found that cells were found in animals and in plants. And so that was in the 1600s. And then for a long time, nobody even took up, after Hooke and Leeuwenhoek, after they passed on, nobody took over their experiments or their research, and it kind of sat there for a while until in the 1800s, like 200 years later, these two guys, Schleiden and Schwann, came along. Schleiden was a botanist, which is someone who studies plants, and he said, you know what, all plant parts are made of cells. So he was studying all different kinds of plants, and he came to the conclusion after all of his work that all plants are made of cells. And Theodor Schwann, and these guys were friends. This guy was a physiologist, and he's a close friend of Schleiden. And he was looking at different animal tissues, and he said, you know what, not just all plant parts are made of cells, all animal tissues are made of cells too. And then we have one more guy we need to talk about, Rudolf Virchow. And he said, you know, where do cells come from? And he discovered through his research and through looking at cells that they were in different stages. And from those different stages, he said, you know what, cells come from other cells. So here's the three parts of the cell theory from those three guys. And remember, Robert Hooke and Leeuwenhoek were the first two guys who kind of pioneered this. But then it took 200 years more before this cell theory came to be. So the first part of the cell theory is all organisms are composed of one or more cells. 2, the cell is the basic unit of life in all living things. Basically, the cell is the building block of a life. Okay? And 3, Rudolf Virchow said all cells come from other cells. And those are the 3 parts of your cell theory. All organisms are composed of one or more cells. The cell is the basic unit of life in all living things, and cells come from other cells. Okay, this is where we start to get a little bit confused with some things, so we're going to try and take this as slow as we can. Objective 43, I can describe sexual and asexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction is what we are familiar with. It is reproduction by 2 parents. Our bodies create sex cells, egg and sperm, through a process called meiosis. Okay, and we're going to talk about meiosis in a minute, so I don't want you to look at that. Meiosis allows for sexual reproduction to occur. Okay, and what you need to know, the most important thing you need to know, is that sexual reproduction produces offspring that are genetically different from their parents. Genetically different. Asexual reproduction, on the other hand, is just one parent. Okay, only one parent, which means the offspring are genetically identical to the parent. Okay, the parent and the child have the same exact DNA. Your DNA is different from your parents because you are a product of sexual reproduction, meaning you got half of your DNA from mom and half from dad, so you are genetically different from your parent. In asexual reproduction, offspring are genetically identical. The cells in our bodies reproduce asexually. So all of our blood cells are exactly the same. Okay? All of our skin cells are exactly the same. Our body cells duplicate themselves in a process called mitosis, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. There's some other forms of asexual reproduction that happen with organisms. The first one is binary fission. These happen in prokaryotes, and you guys are familiar with the word eukaryote, which means that it has a nucleus. Prokaryotes means there's no nucleus, and that you'll be studying those in 8th grade. Bacteria cells and archaea are prokaryotes, and they reproduce by binary fission. And it's when the single-celled organism divides into 2 equal parts. Also, some plants send out runners or they have bulbs, but they grow more identical plants to themselves. Strawberries are a type of, strawberries reproduce asexually, and also poplar trees. Budding, the parent produces an outgrowth or a bud, which detaches and becomes a new individual, like hydra, yeast, and coral. I'm not in drawing mode. I always have issues with that. I'm so sorry, guys. So here is an example of yeast, and you can see these little yellow things on the yeast. Those are the buds, and when they get big enough, they're just going to fall off. We have spores. Spores are released and become new plants. Again, that's asexual. We talked about sporozoa when we were doing the protists. And also ferns release spores as well. Again, that's a type of asexual reproduction. And then we have what's called regeneration. It's when parts of an organism can regrow missing parts or become new organisms if the injury is severe. So starfish and sponges. So if we have a sponge and the sponge is like, it looks like this and it gets broken in half for some reason, this half right here would just regrow the second half and become its own, and this half right here would regrow and become its own. So we would get 2 new sponges from that break. Okay? So I'm going to show you a short brain pop on asexual reproduction to give you a more clear idea about how that works from one parent.
Can you reach the milk? Thanks. Dear Tim and Moby, can you tell the difference between a male amoeba and a female amoeba? From Jerry. No, it's not a riddle, Moby. Amoebas don't have males and females. They reproduce asexually, meaning without sex. Okay, have your laugh. Asexual reproduction is pretty common among plants and simple animals. In some plants, like the strawberry, a stem extends away from the parent plant, with child plants growing all along it. Aspen and poplar trees do the same thing with their roots, shooting them out in all directions to grow new trees. A single grove of trees like these might all come from one parent. Farmers have asexually reproduced plants for thousands of years by taking cuttings from one and replanting them. However asexual reproduction is done, the children plants are always genetically identical to the parent plant. So they're actually clones. Clones share the same genetic information, but parents and their sexually reproduced offspring do not. In sexual reproduction, a female egg cell is fertilized by a male sperm cell. Each cell contains a half set of the parent's chromosomes, or genes. When the two cells combine, the genes do too, making a unique new individual. But in asexual reproduction, the parent's genes simply split in two. In eukaryotes, organisms with nuclei in their cells, the chromosomes replicate through mitosis. That's the process of cell division that goes on all the time in your body. In most prokaryotes, organisms without nuclei, the chromosomes replicate through a similar process called binary fission. Bacteria are prokaryotes that reproduce this way. Some animals can reproduce asexually by a neat little process called budding. In budding, a child organism develops as a growth on the parent's body. In some animals, like the yeast here, the bud falls off and becomes an independent creature. In other animals, like corals, the buds stay put, just one more clone rooted to the entire colony. And you've probably heard about how a starfish that gets its arm cut off will grow back a new one. That's a process called regeneration, which in certain cases is a form of asexual reproduction. Like, if an injury is severe enough, the animal can regenerate into two or more separate children. Yeah, I don't think that sponge will regenerate. Well, it's made of plastic.
Okay, so you got a quick look into what mitosis is and how that works. And we're going to talk about mitosis and meiosis and what those are. So I'm trying to break this down into the bare minimums of what you need to know. Okay, so this is the first thing you need to know. Mitosis happens in your body cells. Meiosis happens in your sex cells only. Okay, which is egg if you're a female, sperm if you're a male. Okay? In mitosis, you start with one parent cell. The DNA replicates itself. You can see there's 1, 1, 1, 1, and then we have 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. And then those pairs break apart, and we get two daughter cells that are exactly the same as the parent cell. So in mitosis, we end with 2. Okay? In meiosis, again, this process starts the same as in mitosis. One parent cell, DNA replicates, it splits into 2. We have 2 identical to the parent cell. But then in meiosis, we go through a second division in which each of these 2 cells come up with 2 daughter cells. These are called haploids because they contain half the genetic information as the parent cell. Okay, so these 2 over here, 46 chromosomes, 46, 46, 46. Okay, we have 46 in the parent here. We replicate, we get 46 times 2 is 92, I think. And then they break down, they get 46, 46, and they break down again, and we end up with 23 in each of these daughter cells, and they are called haploids because they have half the number. These are called diploids, meaning di means 2. So That's double the number of the haploid. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. So meiosis happens in our body cells, and we end up with 2 identical daughter cells to the parent cell. Meiosis only happens in our sex cells, and we end up with 4 daughter cells with half the number of chromosomes. Okay, so this is what I was just telling you. The difference between mitosis and meiosis is that mitosis produces 2 identical daughter cells. Meiosis produces 4 genetically different daughter cells. Remember, they have half the genetic information. So here's the numbers. The cell created from mitosis are diploid. Remember, I told you that di, that root word right there, means 2. So that's why they say it's 2n. The cells in meiosis are haploid, or half, meaning n. Okay, so diploid, the 2n. 2 of each chromosome in a pair is going to give us 46 or 23 pairs. Okay? In a haploid, 1 of each chromosome just gives us 23. Okay? Human cells have 46 chromosomes. Therefore, the diploid number of chromosomes is 46. Haploid is 23. That's what I just showed you. The reasons why. Why do we have mitosis? Mitosis, again, happens in your body cells. We have mitosis to repair and replace, okay, other damaged cells or cells that have been worn out, to allow us to grow. We have to be able to create more cells, because think about how much we grow from when we're born to right now. You're 13 years old, you're still not even finished growing yet. If you didn't have a way to repair or replace your cells, you wouldn't be able to grow. For asexual reproduction, okay, our cells in our bodies reproduce asexually, so they are genetically identical to each other. Meiosis, why do we have meiosis? I told you earlier that meiosis allows us to have sexual reproduction. So in order for us to get half of our information from mom and half of our information from dad, we have to have a process that splits those chromosomes in half, so you have one set of your 23 chromosomes from mom and one set from dad. Okay? So we remember meiosis gives us 4 cells with half the number of chromosomes, so that when your sex cell and your sperm and your egg combine, so if this is your egg with 23, this is your sperm with 23, and your sperm and your egg combine, that should be a 3, we get 1 complete set of chromosomes. And 46 is the number that makes a human a human. Different animals have different numbers of chromosomes, but all humans have 46 chromosomes. Okay? One last thing, the where. Again, I've been talking about this. Where does mitosis occur? Mitosis occurs in our normal body cells. So the way that we remember that is mitosis happens in my toes. That's your body cells. And meiosis makes me. So those are the sex cells, okay? Meiosis only occurs in sex cells, mitosis in every other cell in your body, okay? And that is it. I tried to break it down. We're going to be working on lots of things in class that will help deepen our understanding of these 2 systems, as well as cell theory and whatever the first thing is that we talked about. I can't remember. All right, see you guys in class. Come with questions if you have them.